Many people believe life ends the moment the heart stops beating. Others insist there is nothing beyond what we can see and measure with instruments. But what if I told you that, during just 7 unconscious minutes, I lived something that defies logic, science, and even the most common beliefs? I know it may sound strange, even impossible. After all, who would believe that in such a short time it would be possible to cross the boundary between life and death, and return bringing a clear, direct, and transformative message? Yet that is exactly what happened to me. What I experienced was not a dream, not delirium, and far from imagination. It was real. And the most striking thing is that what I discovered can completely change the way you see your own life, even today. Get ready, in the next few minutes you will learn the truth I brought back from there. A simple truth, but so powerful that it can become the key for you to live differently, lighter, more intense, and truer. Before diving into this experience, take a moment to subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and share this video with someone special. That way, besides not missing future content, you help this message reach more people who also need to hear it. It was a normal day, like so many others. I woke up early, drank a hurried coffee, kept appointments, plunged into routine. I had no idea that that would be the day life would interrupt me abruptly. Suddenly, without warning, my body simply shut down. There was no time to think, to ask for help, to prepare. Just a sudden void. While doctors and people around ran to help me, I was no longer there. Outside, they said I was unconscious for 7 minutes. Inside, however, it seemed I had crossed an eternity. Shortly after the blackout, I was taken by an absolute silence. It was not like turning off the sound of a television or being in an empty room. It was something greater, a silence that seemed to swallow everything. There was no time, there was no pain, there was no fear. Just a strange sense of detachment. It's hard to explain, but it felt like I had no weight anymore. I didn't carry worries, there was no anxiety, there was no never-ending task list. I simply was. After the silence, something began to change. A soft light appeared. It wasn't a light that hurt the eyes, nor did it come from a single point. It emerged from all sides, as if it completely wrapped me. The most impressive thing is that this light not only illuminated, it seemed to know me. It was as if there were intelligence in it, as if each particle said, "You are safe." There was no rush, there was no judgment. Just welcome. And it was at that moment that I realized something was being told to me. The message did not come as an external voice, but as a deep understanding that arose within me. It was as if it were impossible not to comprehend. And what I received was simple, but powerful. Life is too short to be wasted. Love more. Forgive more. Be light. Every gesture has value, even the smallest one. It was as if someone reminded me of something I already knew deep down, but had forgotten. I was living on autopilot, chasing commitments, worried about opinions, letting the essential go unnoticed. At that moment, I realized it wasn't about the number of years, but about the quality of life. Suddenly, as if being pulled back, I felt my body again. Air filled my lungs, the sounds around returned, and I realized the doctors had managed to bring me back. But I was no longer the same. Something in me had changed forever. I returned with a new clarity, with the feeling that I had been given a second chance. And that chance was not to be wasted. On returning, I noticed some truths that could no longer be ignored. Time is the greatest treasure. Every minute is a gift. Love is what truly matters. Nothing else remains. Forgiveness frees more the giver than the receiver. Life is in the details. In the hug, the smile, the shared silence. Now is the only moment that exists. These lessons seem simple, but most of us forget them in daily life. From that day on, I decided to change. I began to see value in things that previously seemed small. The smell of morning coffee. The laugh of a child in the street. The sunset that insists on repeating itself, but is never the same. I began to listen more, complain less, hug harder. I decided not to hold grudges. I'm not perfect, but I now live with the awareness that every instant could be the last. After sharing my experience, I found that many other people went through something similar. Reports from people who were between life and death and also spoke of light, peace and love. Some saw deceased relatives, others heard messages, others felt only an indescribable peace. These stories don't have to be identical to confirm a truth. There is something beyond what we see. Something that calls us to live more consciously. And now, I want to ask, are you living or just surviving? How many times did you say I love you this week? Who do you need to forgive to be free? If you had only 7 days to live, what would you do differently? These questions are not to scare, but to awaken. Life is too short to be postponed. I blacked out for 7 minutes, but came back with something I cannot keep to myself. The message is simple: love, forgive, live truly. Don't wait to lose someone to value them. Don't wait for tomorrow to change. Don't wait to have time to start. Time is now. And now is all we have. Live intensely, because every minute counts. What I am inviting you to do now is not to take my word for it blindly, but to consider possibility. Consider that there may be more to existence than the steady rhythm of clocks, than the lists we make and the tasks we check off. Consider that what matters is not what we accumulate, but who we become in the process of living. Consider that bravery can sometimes be as simple as saying I love you first, or letting go of a grievance that has quietly hardened inside your chest. In the weeks and months that followed, I kept a journal. Writing became a ritual that helped me hold on to the clarity I had tasted during those minutes away. On paper I wrote the names of people I had unintentionally neglected. I wrote apologies I had delayed. I wrote plans for days that would be different because I now understood the preciousness of time. Those simple acts of putting pen to paper turned out to be small rituals of repair, and each ritual added a new layer of care to my ordinary days. In one entry I described a morning when I deliberately sat and watched the steam rise from my cup. The aroma, which I had always accepted as background, became a headline. I noticed the way sunlight fell across the table, the way a sparrow tapped against the window, and the sudden swell of gratitude that rose inside me for things I had taken for granted. That moment, harmless and minute, stitched my days together with a new thread of meaning. You might wonder, how do these insights hold up against the mechanics of living? Bills still arrive, relationships still require effort, work still needs focus. The change I speak of is not magical. It does not exempt you from responsibility. What it does is alter your orientation toward responsibility. Instead of seeing obligations as chains, they become opportunities to practice presence and generosity. Paying a bill becomes an act of stewardship, doing your job well becomes a way to serve others, apologies become invitations to repair more than just feelings. To be clear, I do not claim to have all the answers. I do not propose a set of rules that will solve every problem. I only share what shifted for me when the veil thinned: perspective. Perspective is a small word with large consequences. The same argument that used to escalate into days of coldness now dissolves when I remember the clarity I received. The petty indignation that once dominated a morning disappears when I stop to breathe and remember what is essential. One of the most surprising consequences of this experience was how it affected my fears. Fear did not vanish overnight, it is persistent and rooted, but fear's authority weakened. When you have felt, in some way, the peace that lies beyond panic, you realize panic is not the final arbiter of reality. You can hold fear and still act with kindness. You can feel anxiety and choose to respond with care rather than react with avoidance. Courage, in this sense, became less about grand gestures and more about the quiet continuations: calling a friend you have postponed, keeping an appointment with yourself, going back to apologize even when it is uncomfortable. I also learned about the economy of attention. Attention is a finite currency. Where you spend it shapes your life. I started investing my attention in conversations that mattered, in moments that stitched me to other people, in tasks that fed my life rather than consumed it. The endless scroll of distractions still appears like a bright, cheap streetlight, pulling focus, but I found it easier to turn away, to put my phone face down, and to be present to the person across from me. The result was surprising: deeper conversations, fewer misunderstandings, and the slow building of trust that only consistent presence brings. Several people reached out to me after I shared my story. Some were skeptical, some wanted medical explanations, others told me similar tales. One woman wrote that she had a near-death experience after a car accident and had seen her grandmother who told her to forgive a sibling. That phone call later ended in an embrace and a reconciliation that had felt impossible before. Another man said he had been pulled back in surgery and woke with the knowledge that he had to quit a job he hated and start drawing again. He later opened a small studio and found joy in teaching children. Reading these letters felt like joining a large, informal chorus of people who had been nudged towards simple priorities by something they could not easily explain. I want to be cautious about the language of certainty. Science has not given us a complete map of consciousness. Medicine explains the mechanics, blood, neurons, oxygen, but the subjective quality of what people report in these moments is still mysterious. Neuroscience can tell us what happens to the brain in trauma, but it cannot yet reduce the rich, moral clarity some people report to a simple chemical equation. And perhaps that is not a failure of science, perhaps it is an invitation to humility. We should welcome both the empirical insights of medicine and the existential insights that come from singular human experience. Both can coexist without elbowing one another aside. If you are someone who questions everything, that skepticism is valuable. Questioning protects against deception and forces rigor. But I invite you also to hold a space where mystery can exist without threatening truth. Think of it as stretching your mind's muscles. One side practices skepticism, the other practices openness. Together they make for a resilient thinker. You can ask for evidence and still be open to experiences that challenge easy explanations. That tension, between rigorous inquiry and generous openness, is, to me, one of the healthiest ways to live. Practical steps helped me translate insight into habit. I made a small list of daily practices and called it the handful of things. It was not intensive, just 5 modest acts I could repeat: 1 deliberate pause in the morning, 1 sincere compliment to someone, 1 moment to breathe deeply when stress rose, 1 effort to listen without interrupting, and 1 small act of service or generosity. Over time, these handfuls added up to a life that felt intentionally arranged rather than accidentally spent. I also learned to reframe failure. Where I once saw failure as shameful and terminal, I started seeing it as data, information about what did not work and a guide for a changed approach. This reframing does not make failure pleasant, but it makes it useful. When you combine forgiveness with curiosity about how things went wrong, you begin to learn with patience and reduce the anxiety that too often accompanies risk. Grief remained real. I did not become immune to loss. People I loved still left, and those absences cut. But the experience of the 7 minutes taught me to build a different relation to grief. Instead of avoiding the pain, I learned to sit with it, to speak the person's name aloud, to tell stories about them, and to allow the ache to be part of a life that also contains laughter and connection. Grief, in this sense, did not shrink, it matured into reverence. There were unexpected professional consequences too. I found myself choosing projects that resonated with care and meaning rather than prestige. It was not an easy shift, money still mattered, but my decisions started aligning more with values than with external validation. Sometimes that meant saying no to opportunities that would have fattened a resume but starved my sense of purpose. Other times it meant choosing smaller, more human initiatives that allowed me to form deep collaborations and to feel that my work contributed to something larger than a title. What would I tell someone who is skeptical but curious? Start small. Instead of expecting a revelation, begin with experiments. Spend 5 minutes each morning in silence and notice what shifts. Say "I love you" to someone without waiting for a perfect moment. Offer forgiveness internally, even if the other person never hears it. Forgiveness often begins inside. Notice your attention. Where do you habitually put it? Can you redirect even a fraction towards someone who needs you? These experiments are modest but powerful. They change the architecture of days, and over time the architecture shapes a life. I recognize that not everyone has the luxury to make large life changes. Caregiving responsibilities, financial obligations, and personal history create constraints that cannot be wished away. my intention is not to prescribe an impossible ideal. Rather, it is to offer a perspective that can fit into various lives. Small adjustments, a different tone in a conversation, an extra minute of patience, a shorter list of tasks, can ripple into surprising places. There is also a social dimension to living with new awareness. When I returned with this sense of urgency about presence, some friends did not understand. One friend accused me of becoming sentimental, another worried I would abandon responsibility. These reactions were reminders: change is a social negotiation. When you shift internally, your relationships may need time to accommodate your new pace. In those moments, clear communication helped, explaining why I was choosing differently, setting boundaries kindly, and inviting others into small experiments rather than demanding immediate transformation. Spiritual traditions of many kinds have long emphasized what I glimpsed: the primacy of love, the integrity of forgiveness, the invitation to presence. Those traditions frame these ideas within rituals, teachings, and communities. I do not claim membership in any one tradition as the sole keeper of truth. Instead, I find resonance across traditions, a kind of chorus where different voices hum similar notes. Whether through prayer, meditation, songwriting, or communal meals, people have sought to remember what matters. There is comfort and wisdom in those long-standing practices, and they can support modern experiments in presence. If you are carrying a regret, do something with it. Write the letter you have not written. Make the call you have avoided. Offer the apology you have rehearsed. These actions are not guarantees, but they are ways to align your life with intention rather than postponement. The cost of trying may be discomfort, the cost of not trying is often a lifetime of wonder about what might have happened. I do not want to romanticize suffering. There is nothing inherently noble about pain. Trauma harms, and the structural injustices that make suffering worse for many people cannot be glossed over by personal insight alone. What I offer is not a balm for systemic wrongs, but a personal invitation to live into whatever agency you have. When we act with more love, more forgiveness, and more presence, we change the space immediately around us, and sometimes those changes accumulate into social shifts. Let me offer a few practical exercises that helped me anchor this new orientation into daily living. First, try a 2-minute awareness practice, twice a day. For 2 minutes, stop what you are doing, sit quietly, and notice your breath. Notice where tension sits in your body and allow it to soften. This practice is simple but effective. It trains your nervous system to reorient away from perpetual urgency and toward calm attention. Second, create a gratitude scroll. Each night, jot down 3 things that went well, however small. Over weeks, the scroll becomes an archive of ordinary miracles. Another concrete shift is to change how you relate to technology. Phones were created to connect, yet they often disconnect us from the people right in front of us. Try designating phone-free zones and phone-free times, perhaps during meals or the first 30 minutes after you come home. Use those reclaimed moments to ask a genuine question of someone in your life. What was the best part of your day? Listen fully. These small interruptions to our habitual attention patterns can restore the sense of human connection that algorithms cannot replace. If you are in a difficult relationship, consider seeking mediation or structured conversation practices. Tools like nonviolent communication or couples therapy offer ways to speak truth while maintaining tenderness. The clarity I felt did not remove the need for skillful communication, rather, it made skillful communication more important. You might be surprised how much is resolved when both parties commit to curiosity instead of assumption. A few frequently asked questions that often come up when people hear this kind of story: did I hallucinate? Maybe parts of it could be described that way, but that does not erase the moral clarity I received. Is this proof of an afterlife? Not in a scientific sense that would satisfy every skeptic. Is it useful? Yes, because it moved me to change and because others report similar shifts. Will you experience the same thing if you have a near-death experience? Not necessarily. Experiences differ in content and form, but many report an ethical reordering afterward. I do not want this message to be a fleeting sentiment that comforts briefly and then fades. If you want a practical way to carry it forward, choose one weekly practice for the next month. It might be a 2-minute pause twice daily, a weekly handwritten note to someone you appreciate, a phone call to a family member, or volunteering regularly. Track it. Notice how it affects your mood, your relationships, and your sense of meaning. Small practices create new neural habits. Change at the level of neurons is how durable changes in life direction occur. If you find resistance, if you feel cynical or overwhelmed, be gentle with yourself. Resistance often signals that something valuable is being asked of you, vulnerability. Allow resistance to be a tutor rather than a tyrant. Sit with it. Ask it what it fears. Sometimes the answers are practical. I cannot afford that. I am already stretched thin. I do not know how to start. If those are the answers, then choose an even smaller step. Tiny is not trivial, tiny is accessible. Finally, let me return to the central invitation. Life is brief and unpredictable. The message I received in those 7 minutes was not a complex doctrine. It was an invitation to shift priorities, to recognize the smallness of many of our anxieties in relation to the vastness of what truly matters, and to practice love in ways that are immediate and tangible. If you can take one small, intentional action this week, to tell someone you love them, to forgive a small wrong, to listen without planning your response, you will be honoring that invitation in a concrete way. Thank you for taking the time to read this testimony. If it resonated, consider sharing it with someone who might need the reminder. If you have questions, stories, or doubts, I would welcome hearing them. Our lives are better when shared, and sometimes a single conversation can reroute a life. Above all, be kind to yourself. Start where you are. Love what you can. Forgive what you must. Live the small truths loudly.